Alright, first and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushua, Ba'ashim Makam and double honors to the elder bishops and apostles of Great Millstone that taught me this truth. Another week in, week out doing the work. And today, I'm going to start going over some recent news I saw, how there's some cyber attacks on the water supply, or water system, over there in Minnesota and Georgia. And this is something that me, myself, I've been speaking about for a while, the brothers have been speaking about for a while, how those cyber attacks, were going to take place. And specifically, more, this has been out since you had that guy, Klaus Schwab, I believe it's called the World Economic Forum. He, on one of those panels, he was saying how the next one, is a cyber style, a cyber pandemic. And, call halal Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. You saw a license plate 441, 144. But he was going into how the next one is going to be a cyber style pandemic, okay, of cyber attacks, and that we have to be unaware for that. And that was roughly, I believe, like 2-3 years ago when he said that, and we're seeing it right now. So we know that there's going to be a time where, famine hits, chaos hits, and everywhere there's going to be a lack of resources. That is what all the prophets saw, and we're slowly but surely seeing the beginning of it right now. So we'll start with Daniel chapter 12. We'll go from there. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." Okay, this is going into the time of Jacob's trouble, right? A time like never before seen, which hasn't happened yet. Okay, this hasn't happened yet, because once it happens, never again will there be such a scenario. Okay, there's going to be complete peace on the earth after this takes place. So this is an end time prophecy that we're starting to see right now. Right? It involves famine, it involves chaos, uproars of the people, wars everywhere, a complete economic systemic collapse, and it all is going to happen, I believe, in our lifetime. Okay, looking at the prophecies and everything that's unfolding, I believe that this will happen in the next 100 years, but we'll see. That's all up to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, and ultimately it will happen is the thing. So it says that there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. Right? The deliverance is going to come by the way of the so-called UFOs, right, which in the scriptures are referred to as clouds, right? Those are the angels, the vehicles of the angels. And I was watching a video earlier that was going into how, there's no such thing as a rapture, which is true, because when you go into that whole doctrine, that's essentially going into the idea that before anything happens, that people are going to get beamed up and that they're going to escape the tribulation, which is not true at all. Okay, the scriptures go into how, you're going to have to go through it. And that, I believe that's Matthew chapter 24, if I'm correct. No one is going to be able to just, skip what's coming and just enter, into the kingdom. Which that's another thing, is that the kingdom of heaven is on earth. Right? It's not just a magical place where, there's white little baby angels floating around. No, it's a kingdom on earth, which is the Israelites ruling this earth and the universes in righteousness. So when you go into Matthew chapter 24 and verse let's see, right, when you go into Matthew chapter 24 and verse 29, it says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken." Which, when you go into what that's talking about, is going into the nuclear destruction. It says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Right, so Yahushai coming back with the angels. And as it says right there, coming in the clouds of heaven, coming with the clouds. Because Yahushai himself is going to be on a chariot, on a cloud, and he's coming with the angels. So it says, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Okay, because it's all about the elect at the end of the day, right? Salvation is not for all nations, and even for the nation of Israel, he's not coming to save all the Israelites as he did in ancient Egypt. Okay, only the elect, okay, the remnant. Which when you go into Isaiah chapter 10, this is one of the first times we read about that. But actually, it breaks it down if you keep reading. When you read to verse 36, it says, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Right, which cuts anyone that essentially tries to put a date on it. Right, you can't say, oh, he's coming back, August 24th of 2026. Right, because nobody knows that. You can only go based off the prophecies. And the prophecies are essentially that measuring stick. For example, we know that, the return is not going to happen until we see that the mark of the beast is made mandatory. We know that the nukes are not going to drop until we see that the mark of the beast is made mandatory. Right? So this gives us a certain, parameters as to, where we're at in terms of prophecy. So that is the only way, we can know how close we are, is the prophecies. And the scriptures talk about how, if you're in the right spirit, you're going to be tuning into those prophecies. That's Revelation. Let's get that. Revelation chapter 20, I believe. Revelation chapter, my bad that I can't pull these scriptures up off the top just because I don't have a second phone anymore, but just quoting it, it essentially goes that the testimony of Yahushai is the spirit of prophecy, right? So that is the spirit you want to be in, is constantly monitoring, what's taking place. But it says, for as in days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Right? So people are supposed to be distracted. People are supposed to be living up their lives, right? Being, inundated by, this world, giving themselves into all those pleasures, and not caring about the truth until it finally happens, and then they're gonna want to get right. But as it says, many that day shall say, Lord, Lord, and he shall say, depart from me, I never knew you. So it says, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken, and the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the one shall be taken, and the other left. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. Right, so it's going to be, something where not everyone makes it. And that's, like I said, going back to Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 20, that's one of the first parts where we read this. So let's actually talk about the elect today. I'll hit that point quite a amount of times. Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 20, it says at the top, a remnant shall be saved. And it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, but shall stay upon Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. Right? So when these things start taking place, the elect are not going to, rely upon this system, upon these Edomites, upon anything to ultimately be, sane, to be delivered. It says that the elect are going to rely upon Yahweh Bashim, Yahweh Shai for everything. And, I always read 2nd Ezra chapter 16 and verse 70 around there, because it hits that point clearly how, in that day, to not doubt, not be fearful, For Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai is the one that is going to guide us through everything. So it says, the remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty power, right? Because it's all about the elect at the end of the day. It doesn't say all the Israelites are going to return unto Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, only the remnant. It says, for though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return, the consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. Right, so it's only about a specific portion, which when you go into a chapter in 2nd Esdras, it goes into how the Lord has reserved for himself a grape of the cluster, a plant of a great people. And it says, let the multitude perish then, which are born in vain. So a lot of people, walking around now, a lot of our people are essentially in vain because they're not going to change. And the only solution is ultimately, to be destroyed by those thermonuclear missiles. Which it says that in 2nd Esdras 9, if I remember correctly, how, the same must know it after death by pain. But it says, for though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return, that consumption decree shall overflow with righteousness. Right, so the elect and the remnant are the ones that are ultimately going to turn back. And let's go to Zechariah 14. This is one of the central chapters to go into when talking about this topic. Zechariah chapter 14. Haggai, Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 'and I have to do some. Give me a second. Right, Zechariah 13, my bad. So when you go into Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 7, it says, the death of Hamashiach foretold, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, saith Yahweh of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. Right, that's going into the Israelites being scattered throughout all four corners of the earth, which has been happening, through generations and generations. With the most recent, one happening over here with the slavery, the transatlantic slavery, and how these Edomites had us enslaved and beat that, white plantation Christianity into our people. But we've been being scattered for, generations, and ultimately made to forget who we are as a nation. That goes back to the prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 14 and verse 2, if I remember correctly. Let's see if I can get that. No, this goes into something else, but Jeremiah 7 to 14. Jeremiah, I can't find it, but essentially goes into how the Lord was going to make us discontinue from our heritage, right, which goes into forget who we are and ultimately abandon all those customs, which one of the main times that happened is when you go into the Greek captivity, right? It's written about in the book of Maccabees how Antiochus Epiphanes made the Israelites start following the Greek customs and forget the Sabbath and the laws and everything that had to deal, with the Most High Yahweh. And it was all to make us ultimately forget the ordinances and become Greeks, become defiled. But Zechariah 13 verse 8 says, and it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith Yahweh, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, Yahweh is my power. Right, so in all the land, 2/3 were going to be destroyed. 2/3 of the nation of Israel were going to be destroyed, and only 1/3 was going to be delivered. Right, and that right there shows you how this is not for everyone. You know, this is not a salvation for all nations. You know, all you have to say the name is JC and that's it. No, there are certain, you know, trials or conditions that have to be met. So it says, and I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people. They shall say, Yahweh is my power. Right? And that refinement goes into the trials and tribulations that ultimately all the elect are going to have to go through for the word. And that's why when you read in, I believe it was Paul or John, he said that, you know, I am baptized with water, but one, you know, greater than me is going to baptize with the Holy Spirit and with fire, which that fire was going into those trials and tribulations. So going into, you know, that the elect, when you go into Romans 11 and verse 7, this is one of the scriptures that says it very clearly how essentially not all Israelites are going to get it. Romans chapter 11 and verse 7. It says, what then? Israel had not obtained that which is seeking for, but the election hath obtained it, and the rest were blinded. All right, so going into how, you know, what are the Israelites seeking for? They're seeking the truth, the answers. All of our people, whether they understand it or not, they're seeking answers as to what's taking place. That's why you see them in the black church. You see them in Islam. You see them in, you know, the Hindu. You see them with Buddha. Whatever it is, you know, they're searching answers as to why we're here and what's taking place. And it says the election hath obtained it, but the rest were blinded. So only the elect are going to obtain the truth when it comes to the scriptures, and only the Israelites can ever do that. And it says the rest were blinded, right, which is going into the 2/3, how ultimately they're never going to get it. You know, no matter how perfectly you break down the prophecies or explain, you know, certain parables, there's some people that just can't get it. And it says, according as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear, unto this day. Right, so it is the Most High, Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai, who has made them, so they can't get it. Right? So that's why when you read Ephesians chapter 4, it talks about those that were predestinated unto salvation. Because it's already written since the beginning who's going to get it and who's not. That's, you know, the same thing is talked about in Romans chapter 9 when it talks about Jacob and Esau and how ultimately, you know, before they did any evil or good, it was already predestinated, you know, who was going to do what and how Jacob was going to be the light. And then it goes on to talk about how, you know, is there unrighteousness with God? Because this is the way it is. It says, God forbid. For he hath mercy on whom he hath mercy, and he has compassion on whom he has compassion. So it all goes back to, you know, pre-selection and ultimately what's taking place in this world when it comes to, you know, the worldwide events is already, you know, written. We're just living out that story. So the main thing recently has been, you know, that whole Iran, United States conflict. And what that is going to result in is dragging in Russia, you know, to the battlefield and sending, you know, boots on the ground over there to Iran to fight that. And that's backed by Joel, the 2nd chapter. So I'm going to hit a slight pivot now and talk about that, because got to hit all the prophecies, you know, when it comes to, you know, this book. Try to hit all the prophecies, you know, because be here all day if we try to hit all the prophecies. But the main ones touched on how salvation is for all nations. Now let's get that World War III. So when you go into Joel chapter 2, And I'll start at verse 1. It says, blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of Yahweh cometh, for it is nigh at hand. Right, and we're blowing the trumpet right now. Brothers worldwide are blowing the trumpet and letting our people know what's taking place. And the main way that the word is going out is by the way of the internet. Okay, the internet was created for the word to go out, information to, accelerate. Because the scriptures talk about how this word shall go out throughout all four corners of the earth, and then shall the end come. And that wouldn't be possible without the internet. Because imagine, going, on foot to every single place in the world. It'd be impossible. But now by the way of YouTube or any, platform, you can record a video and publish it, and anyone with the access of internet can now tap in and essentially hear the gospel. So that's one of the reasons why the internet was invented. And I believe it's Psalms chapter 19. It talks about that. Slight pivot. Psalms chapter 19 and verse 1. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. Right, that's going into the internet. How, anywhere you could hear this knowledge. Right, day unto day, night unto night is showing knowledge. Okay, non-stop, you can tune into that information. Okay, the word is going out. There's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Right, because you got brothers who prophesy in all types of languages. It says, their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their words at the end of the world, and them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. Right, because the internet is worldwide, and that's why it's called the worldwide net. It says, which is as a bridegroom out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Right, so from one end of heaven to the other in that circuit. Because that's exactly how the internet works. Right, so it's a relay. Okay, there you have towers down here which send information up to the satellite, and that satellite relays it either to another satellite or down to another tower here, and from that tower you get the information to wherever you're at. Right, so it's a constant relay that's taking place. And like I said, it's all to bring out this information. So, going back to Joel chapter 2. Joel chapter 2 and verse 2, it says, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains, a great people and a strong. There hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. Right, so the same thing that Daniel was saying, he was talking about, is how once this happens, it's never again going to take place. Because part of the kingdom is that peace is going to be established everywhere. The laws are going to be established everywhere. So it says, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. And that's going into those nuclear bombs creating that blast. How once that blast, drops and it starts, eating, it starts destroying. On one side, it's going to be a straight wilderness because it just has burnt everything. But on the other side, it's going to still be as the Garden of Eden. You're still going to have life. Okay, so just to give a understanding on that, it's going into that destruction. And it says, then it keeps going, it goes into something else. It refers to them as horses. And that's where it starts getting symbolic. Which, when you read Revelation, it also refers to the missiles as horses. So, I'm going to jump to verse 20. It says, but I will remove far off from you the northern army, and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, is with his face toward the east sea, and his hinder part toward the utmost sea, and his thing shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he had done great things. And that's going into how these American troops are going to be sent over there to the east to fight, boots on the ground. He's going to send the Northern Army to a land barren and desolate, right? Your Saudi Arabia desert lands. That's where World War III is going to take place. Because on the east of Saudi Arabia, you have a sea, and on the back part, the western, you have another sea. That's what it's talking about. So that's why, like I always say, prophecy is the ultimate filter. Because before these things even take place, we already know that they're going to take place. Before today, before you had this Iranian cyber attack on the water, we already knew they're going to do these things. And there's a scripture that says that, how, I declare the former things, to you, that these things spring forth before they happen. Roughly paraphrasing, I can't pull it up off top. Actually, yeah, I believe that the Lord just gave me the scripture, Isaiah 42 and verse 7. Let's see. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 7. Right, Isaiah chapter 42 and verse 9. Right, so they call Allah Yahweh Bashin Hawashai. Just gave me that scripture off top. But it says, behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Right, so we're already in the know, so by just reading these things, we know exactly what's going to take place, and the order that is going to take place. We know that eventually, it started with Israel, Hamas, then it ultimately leveled up to Israel, Lebanon, then Israel, Iran, and Iran's going to be the nation that drags out Russia, and Israel's going to be the nation that drags out America. And that's how you get that third world war, which that's talked about in Jeremiah 50. Talks about how the least of the flock shall draw them out, going into how these Israelis are going to draw out America, to fight. So Jeremiah 50 and verse 45 says, therefore hear ye the counsel of Yahweh that he hath taken against Babylon, and his purposes that he hath purposed against the land of the Chaldeans. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out, surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. Right, so this is against Babylon, aka America. And it says that the least of the flock is going to draw out America. So it says, surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. Right, because the first nation that will get destroyed, or the order of things, is that Israel will first get destroyed, and then they're going to go towards America. And that's written in Ezekiel chapter 38. It talks about Gog and Magog, and how first they're going to go, to the land of Israel. They're going to cover, the city as a cloud, going into the missiles that are going to be shot. And then it talks about how they're going to go to the land of unwalled villages, right? Going into America. Because you have all these states, there's no literal walls, right? So, as it says, at the noise of the taking of Babylon, the earth is moved, and their cry is heard amongst the nations. So, something is going to take place where it literally makes the whole earth move, and nations are still going to be alive, to witness it. And, as you read, you extrapolate, there's only one thing that could possibly make that happen. But I'm going to actually break down Jeremiah 50 and 51. It's been a while since I've gone into these chapters. So, start at Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 1. And one thing about these two chapters is that they jump around, right? They jump around between the ancient Babylon and the daughter of Babylon, which is what we see today. So starting at Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 1, it says, the word that Yahweh spake against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet, it says, declare ye amongst the nations, and publish and set up a standard, publish and conceal not, say Babylon is taken, Bel is confounded, Merodach is broken in pieces, where idols are confounded, where images are broken in pieces, right? And that's exactly what we're professing right now. How all this eventually, all these religions, this system, is ultimately going to collapse. It says, for out of the north there cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate, and none shall dwell therein. They shall remove, they shall depart, both man and beast. Okay, that those nations that are going to come over here is dealing with, like I said, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, Turkey. These nations will eventually all turn against this place. Eventually, even the allies of America are going to turn on this place. We can read about that in Revelation chapter 17. It talks about how the 10 horns which were upon the beast shall ultimately hate the whore and burn her with fire. So at one point, those 10 horns were in the same mind, in one accord with the whore. But eventually they will turn and burn this place. And that's exactly what we're starting to see right now. How Trump is having problems with NATO, talking about leaving NATO. Right? That's exactly what's written. So it says, in those days and in that time, saith Yahweh, the children of Israel shall come, they and the children of Judah together, going and weeping. They shall go and seek Yahweh their power. That's going into the awakening. How there's going to be a time how the Israelites start waking up and seeking Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua. And that it was going to catch everyone by surprise. Okay? The elites weren't expecting for the Israelites to wake up. Nobody was expecting for us to learn this knowledge and start changing, start repenting and seeking the old paths. But now you see it happening. You see this vibration being pushed worldwide, and people are noticing. People are either loving it or they hate it. You know, there's no in between. That's why it says that the word of the Most High is sharper than any two-edged sword, right? Dividing the whole, the soul, and spirit, roughly paraphrasing. Because when it comes to this, there is no in between. It's either you love it or you hate it. And this world is going to hate the word. Majority of people are not going to accept the words that are being spoken. Okay? They're going to deny it because their intent and their hearts is wicked. So it says, in those days and in that time, I read that, verse 5, they shall ask the way to Zion with their faces thitherward, saying, come and let us join ourselves to Yahweh in a perpetual covenant that shall not be forgotten. It says, my people have been lost sheep. The shepherds have caused them to go astray. They have turned them away on the mountains. They have gone from mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place. Right? I spoke about this earlier, about how we were made to forget. Right? Things happened by the way of these other ideologies, which was part of the curses. It talked about how we're going to be scattered throughout all four corners of the earth to worship gods made out of wood and stone. And that's what you see a lot of our people doing. Right? So those shepherds caused them to go astray. It says, they have gone from mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place. Are you trying to talk to one of our people saying that, you know, we're the Israelites and that, you know, we go back to those people and that this is our history? They don't know anything about it because we have forgotten our resting place. That is our resting place. It says, all that found them have devoured them, and their adversaries said, we offend not because they have sinned against Yahweh, the habitation of justice, even Yahweh, the hope of their fathers. It says, remove out of the midst of Babylon and go forth out of the land of the Chaldeans, and be as the he goes before the flocks. For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken. Their arrow shall be as of a mighty expert man, and none shall return in vain. Right, that's going into those nuclear missiles. Right, symbolically spoken by, it's referred to as arrows, and it's when it talks about those great nations, you know, coming together to shoot arrows upon this place. That's what it's going into. It says, their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man, none shall return in vain. Right, so every single missile that is shot is going to have its purpose. Okay, the angels are going to be up there guiding, you know, exactly where they land. It says, and Chaldea shall be a spoil, all that spoil her shall be satisfied, saith Yahweh. Verse 12, and I'm going to jump around on this. It says, your mother shall be sore confounded, she that bare you shall be ashamed. Behold, the hittermost of the nations shall be as a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. Right, the mother of America is going into the UK, you know, Britain. Okay, how ultimately that place is going to be ashamed of what this, you know, the result of this, of what happens here. It says, because of the wrath of Yahweh it shall not be inhabited, but it shall be wholly desolate. Everyone that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished and hiss at her plagues. So there's going to be people that are still alive after this takes place. And you can read about that in Revelation 18. It talks about how, all that being ships, are going to ultimately say, Babylon is finally fallen. Revelation 18 and verse 15, it says, the merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold, and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company of ships and sailors, and as many as traded by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city, wherein remained rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. Right, so these other nations are going to witness this happening. And the thing about that is that, it's so precise when it comes to the prophecies and the explanation, because it says that these other nations, all that had ships, they remain rich by reason of her costliness, going into how everything was so expensive here, and that's how they came up. And you can see that, that's the way it is. For example, China will make, some Nike shoes for $20 over there, and come over here to America and sell them for 10 times, $200. So by reason of her costliness, all that had ships, because that's one thing, is that you need ships in order to transport that cargo. They remain rich. So, this is beautiful when we go into it, because it shows you how precise the Heavenly Father is and how these things are really true. Before any of this took place, we had perfectly detailed how it was going to take, what was going to happen. So, going into Jeremiah 50 and verse, what was that verse? Right, verse 14. It says, put yourselves in array against Babylon round about, all you that bend the bow. Shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she has sinned against Yahweh. Right, that's the main problem here, is that all that type of left-hand lifestyle is promoted. That's why you look at Revelation 11, it talks about how this city is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. Right, because all those things that they're doing in Sodom and Gomorrah is being seen here on an amplified level. Right, so because of all the atrocities that are happening here, the Most High has to simply just wipe this place clean, right? Fire a second time. It says, shout against her round about, she hath given her hand, her foundations are fallen, her walls are thrown down, for it is the vengeance of Yahweh, take vengeance upon her, as she had done do unto her. Right, so vengeance is part of the Lord. And everything they have done unto us, specifically the Israelites, is going to happen towards all these nations. All right, so this is the judgment of the Lord, that all these prophecies are ultimately going to take place. Jumping down to verse, and then from there, it starts going into ancient Babylon. And when you jump down to verse 22, that's when it goes into, the daughter of Babylon once again. It says, a sound of battle is in the land and of great destruction. How is the hammer of Babylon, or how is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon become a desolation amongst the nations? Right, so a sound of battle is in the land. That's what we're hearing right now, right? Which a lot of it is false news, is propaganda. But eventually, it's not going to be propaganda no more. It's going to be real life, and that's when these people are really going to take the Lord seriously. Is when they realize that they can no longer get on the game. They can no longer go get their McDonald's. They can no longer just chill and watch Netflix and work their 9 to 5. When all those dainties, that so-called easy life is taken away, and people are suffering, okay, they have anxiety, stress, that's when they're going to want to seek the Lord, when it's convenient for them. But right now, it doesn't seem convenient for the masses, because Their, the, their flesh is being appeased. So that's why when you read 2 Ezra 15 and 16, it talks about how the neighbor shall have no pity, upon his neighbor or his brother because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation. Once people can't eat and hard times are upon them, that's when they're going to revolt. That's when you're going to see a lawlessness, is when they can't eat. So it's just a matter of time, man. I wouldn't be surprised, one of these days we just wake up and boom, you have a United States fully blackout. You get a giant Iranian attack and they completely take out all the grids. And we have a full-on blackout, whether it's for a couple days, a week, 2 weeks, a month, and nobody's able to get any information in or out. That's when you're gonna see this place completely change. So it's just a matter of time, and Lord willing, Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, it makes that happen soon, because this world is just very it's just a wicked world, man. Even if you have the bread, even if you have all these material things, at the end of the day, you got to think about the net collective. You got to think about what's really good for this place, and this is not it. The majority of our people are suffering. People of the world are suffering the earth because the wicked are in authority. And as it says, when the wicked are in authority, the people mourn. And that's what we're seeing right now. So just because you have it good, nowadays you got some money, doesn't mean anything. You should still be in the mentality of seeing this all go down. So it says, I have laid a snare for thee. And one thing about the scripture, verse 23, it says, how is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? Right? Because this place is that hammer. Right? America doesn't believe in no, peace treaty or, peace at all. It's just, they see a nail. Every single nation is a nail, and America's gonna hammer them down. If you don't believe in our, whatever, they put sanctions upon them. They tax them. They limit them. Try to make them bend the knee, towards this power. And the nations are tired of that. The nations are realizing that that's not the right way to do things, and that it's not prosperous for a worldwide peace. So they're gonna turn on this place. It says, I have laid a snare for thee, and thou art also taken, O Babylon, thou was not aware. Thou art found and also cut, because thou hast striven against Yahweh. Right, so a snare is laid. Something is going to take place, which I believe that snare to be this whole Iran conflict. The snare is laid where eventually, America's going to get caught. Right, they're going to realize that they're in World War III against Russia and all these powerful nations, and there is no going back. Okay, that's the state they're in right now, is that there is no going back. So there's no going back with Iran because of America's pride. They can't just pull out because they're the strongest nation. And, they know if they continue, ultimately it's going to be even more devastation because they're going against a nation that has been preparing for over 20 years. So however you slice it, a snare is laid. Can't leave, and they don't want to go forward. It says, the Lord Yahweh hath opened his armory and hath brought forth the weapons of his indignation, for this is the work of Yahweh, power of hosts in the land of the Chaldeans. Come against her from the outmost border, open her storehouses, cast her up as heaps, and destroy her utterly, let nothing of her be left. Right, so the Lord has opened his armory, which that's going into all these attacks, which the main weapon, which it refers to in Isaiah 34, Lord willing I get that, is those thermonuclear missiles. It's referred to as the sword of the... They're going to tell them, oh, you don't want to go? Okay, we're just going to send you in a concentration camp, 20 years, 30 years. And, we'll do this, we'll do that. We'll take away everything you have if you don't go fight. Let's consider treason if you don't go fight. So Esau is going to do whatever he can to get those people to go fight. And all these men that go fight, they're all going to die. So what they're not accounting is that they're going to fight Yahushua and the angels. So another thing, when you go into the prophecies, it talks about how, the men of Babylon are essentially, have forborne to fight. They have remained in their holds. They became as women. So these American men are not going to want to go fight. You know, they're realizing that this country is not for them. So it says, Behold, I am against thee, O thou most proud, saith the Lord of hosts. For thy day is come, the time that I will visit thee. And the most proud shall stumble and fall, and none shall raise him up. And I will kindle a fire in his cities, and it shall devour all around about him. It says, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together, and all that took them captives held them fast. They refused to let them go. That's going into the slavery that our people went through here in America. How it says, the children of Judah and the children of Israel, going into the northern and southern kingdom. Northern kingdom being your so-called Latinos and Native Americans as a collective, and your southern kingdom going into your so-called Negroes, right? They were all oppressed together here. And the only time, when you look at history, that the Israelites as a collective were oppressed together is ancient Egypt. Okay? That's the only time it's happened besides this, ancient Egypt. From there, you know, the Israelites were together. They had 40 years of peace with King Solomon. After that, the kingdom was divided into two, the northern and southern kingdom. The northern kingdom went into the Assyrian captivity, and from there they came to the Americas. And the southern kingdom went into the Babylonian captivity, then into the Medo-Persian captivity, and then into the Greek captivity, the Roman captivity, and those were the Israelites that were over there at the time of Yahushua. And then from there, they were ultimately scattered. 40 AD happened. Majority of the Israelites went into northern and western Africa, and from there they were sold by the Ishmaelites, the Arabs, and the Hamites, so-called Africans, to the Edomites, so-called white men. They're brought in transatlantic, they're brought over here in cargo slave ships, transatlantic slavery, and that's where you get the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressing Babylon together. So just, a quick history on that. But it says, the Redeemer is strong, the Lord of hosts is his name. He shall thoroughly plead their cause, that he may give rest to the land and disquiet the inhabitants of Babylon. It says, a sword is upon the Chaldeans, saith the Lord, and upon the inhabitants of Babylon, and upon her princes, and upon her wise men. We jump down to verse 39. It says, therefore the wild beasts of the desert with the wild beasts of the islands shall dwell therein, the owls shall dwell therein, and they shall be no more inhabited forever, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Right, so people are never going to live in this land anymore. After it's destroyed, it's going to be uninhabitable, okay, by the Lord. It's going to be a sign of the power of the Most High. It says, as God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities thereof, saith Yahweh, so shall no man abide there, neither shall any son of man dwell therein. Bro, so as Sodom and Gomorrah, this place is going to be in the same way. It says, behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation, and many kings shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. They shall hold a bow and the lance, they are cruel and will not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon horses, everyone put in array, like a man to the battle against thee, O daughter of Babylon. Right, so it's going to be a joint coalition, as they say. Right, many nations coming upon this place, and they're also going to send boots on the ground over here. So put that in perspective. It says, the king of Babylon hath heard the report of them, and his hands waxed feeble. Anguish took hold of him, he pangs as of a woman in travail. And that finishes off where I was at. So, these things, they will happen, and it's just a matter of time. And now I want to close it off with 2nd Ezra chapter 16, and just break it down a little bit, because 2nd Ezra 16 gives more detail as to how the world will be. So 2nd Ezra chapter 16 and verse 17 says, woe is me, who will deliver me in those days, said Esdras. And why does it say that? It says that because he himself also is going to be here. Esdras is here today. We don't know exactly who he is, through because the reincarnation, no one remembers their past. But Esdras is here doing the work, prophesying once again. It says, let me go back. It says the beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the power shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils, what shall I do when these evils shall come? It says, behold, famine and plague, tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment, but for all these things they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. Right, so all these things are going to take place to ultimately get people, to act right, but they're still not going to act right. Here it is, Jake will be, ribs will be touching, and they're still not going to change. They're still not going to humble themselves and seek Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. It says, behold, victuals shall be so good cheap upon earth, that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow upon earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. And that's the condition we're in right now. Because everything is so cheap, people think that life is sweet. People think that it's chill. Yeah, bro, everything, I could get by. I'll get my 9 to 5, buy my new PS5 and this and that, and, shorty, talk to this girl. That's the mentality people are in. Victuals are so good cheap, victuals are so cheap that people think that it's good. But only then will things keep intensifying and becoming more wicked. Which I always talk about that is just imagine if this place keeps continuing. And just imagine this place in 50 years and how wicked it's going to be. It says, for many of them that dwell upon earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. All right, so if you don't, they get caught because you can't eat, which I believe in Ezekiel talks about that. I always forget the chapter. It talks about how those that be in the city, shall perish of famine and the plague, right? Because the cities is that main concentration of, the food comes in through the trucks. Once the trucks stop, no food from the cities. You can't really plant. And that plague because of the concentration of people. And then it says that those that be in the field, shall the sword destroy. So field going into, your country, the houses out, and essentially the middle of nowhere. The main people that are going to get got that way is a sword. Because if you're in the field, you most likely have, resources, you have water, you have food, because of, stocking up and being out there. But people are going to know that. And that's why they're going to go towards those places with the sword, aka the gun, the actual sword, whatever it is, to take what you got. It says, and the dead shall be cast out as dung, there shall be no man to comfort them, for the earth shall be wasted, and the cities shall be cast down. Right, so people are going to be taken out. 144, people are going to be taken out, and nobody's going to be out here burying them. Right, seeing people on the street dead is going to be a common occurrence. It says, there shall be no man left until the earth and to sow it, the trees shall give fruit, and who shall gather them? The grapes shall ripen, and who shall tread them? For all places shall be desolate of men, so that one man shall desire to see another and to hear his voice. For of a city shall there be 10 left, and 2 of the field, which shall hide themselves in the thick groves and in the clefts of the rock. So, mass death is what's going to take place. And as it says, that all places shall be desolate of men, because majority of men are going to be going and fighting and dying in those wars. So the earth is going to essentially become like those movies where everything just starts growing, and people are going to want to have that brotherly love, but people are not going to be in that mentality. It says, I'm going to jump down, verse 31, it says, even so in those days there shall be 3 or 4 left by them that search their houses with the sword, and the earth shall be laid waste, and the fields thereof shall wax old, and her ways and all her paths shall grow full of thorns, because no man shall travel therethrough. Since the virgins shall mourn having no bridegrooms, the women shall mourn having no husbands, their daughters shall mourn having no helpers, and in the wars shall their bridegrooms be destroyed, and their husbands shall perish of famine. Right, so that's partly why, prophecies such as Isaiah 4:1 are going to take place, because all these men are ultimately going to be taken out. And that's where you get, 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by that name to take away our reproach. So that's where this thing is leading to. And we literally have, the blueprint. This is a matter of time. So it says, hear now these things and understand them, ye servants of Yahweh. Behold, the word of Yahweh, receive it, believe not the gods of whom Yahweh spake. Okay, because you got people out here saying that these things are never going to take place. People out here saying that, the God of this world is not going to do these things. And that people have been talking about these things forever and nothing has happened. And it's just fear mongering. Well, you're supposed to have the righteous fear. Because it says that the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. So, it says, behold, the plagues draw nigh, and are not slack. As when a woman with child in the 9th month bringeth forth her son, within 2 months, within 2 or 3 hours of her birth, great pains compass her womb, which pains when the child cometh forth, they slack not a moment. Even so shall not the plagues be slack to come upon the earth, and the world shall mourn, and sorrow shall come upon it on every side. So, this is what we're witnessing, and this is going to be an intensification. It's going to only intensify. All right, things happen, then they slow down. That contraction. Things happen, they slow down. But we're witnessing how slowly those contractions are starting to get faster, and they're only going to get faster. So, hey, we'll see. But hey, I'll leave it there for today. Another week out, prophesying the word of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, speaking about the prophecies that are going to take place. The water for Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, for putting the Spirit upon me, putting the Spirit upon brothers to do this work, to awaken the elect, and Lord willing, He has me continue, has brothers out there continue, and stay in the right mindset and enduring, because that's what it's all about, is, holding the line, and enduring until the end, not giving up and throwing in the towel. So with that, think about praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashem, and double honors to the honored bishops and apostles of Great Millstone, the top of the truth. Shalom to you, land. Shalom.